WWE released its second quarter earnings this week, and it turned out to be the most profitable quarter in the history of the company. But they can't give Rey Mysterio a raise. This man gave his eyeball for this fucking company, and they can't afford to give him a pay raise. Well, we'll see. I mean, he may yet get his pay raise. He's still negotiating with Vince McMahon. Perhaps he'll end up getting more money after all. But see, this is what happens. This is what happens when you tape television every single week from one location. TV, pay-per-view, and network expenses this quarter were $118 million. That same period a year ago, $170 million. That's over $50 million in savings right there. I mean, if you think about it, WWE is basically, aside from the cinematic stuff, and even if you want to lump that in there, it's basically a studio wrestling show now. That is what it has become by necessity and will continue to be for many more months to come. No matter how hard Vince McMahon wants to wish it away, it has become a studio wrestling show. It's like NWA Power, but with a much bigger budget. And not quite as enjoyable. Yeah, before the pandemic hit, WWE was already scaling back on house shows. I still think there's value in them, because I got a mailbag question about that many months ago, asking about house shows, should WWE just cut them out? Why do they still do them? And I made the argument for why I think they should be kept. Now, I am perfectly fine with scaling back the schedule that they have traditionally had and having to hit every single little market, every single little town, but I definitely think there's value in doing them, especially for the younger talent. But the fallout from this pandemic is probably going to be the death, or partially anyway, for those live events. If they were already money losers in a lot of cases for the company, which I believe they were in many cases, I can see them looking at this and thinking, well, why even continue doing them? Maybe we ought to get out of the live event business and just, stick to TV and pay-per-views and just special shows. So there's going to be a lot of fallout whenever this is all over and things, they are able to get back to their usual business model. I think that usual business model is not going to be so usual anymore. It's going to change. It's going to affect a lot of different aspects of the company, and that's going to be one to watch for, is the future of house shows and live events in this company. A company that has traditionally, for decades, up until recently, been a live event-driven business. I mean, that's how, if you think about it, you go back to the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, that's how they gauged who was drawing, how well is the company doing in certain key markets and other places. What's the gates? Did we sell out? How many tickets did we sell? And there's a shift that has happened, and there's a shift that's going to be accelerated, I think, by this whole pandemic, of them finally closing the chapter, I think, on that part of their business. So that'll be a story in and of itself to watch. So they're saving a lot of money by just running from one location. It also helps that they're paying far less now in taxes than they were a year ago. That's always very helpful. Analyst expectations for this quarter were around $12 million in profits. WWE reported $43 million in profits. That's after tax. After tax profit, $43 million. Although revenue was down. Revenue was down, but the profits were way up. All of the talent that they cut, by the way, because I know some people are going to say, well, this is what happens, when you cut all that talent, you get to, all these profits. All the talent that was cut, all the talent that was furloughed, had nothing to do with their profits soaring this quarter, because they were still paying those people through the middle of July. Only now are they no longer paying all of those people. They were still on the books. So it's really not a case where, well, they had to cut them all in order to post such great numbers. They would have posted those numbers even if they didn't cut all those people or cut their salaries. But it just, the reason they did it, it shows stockholders that they're doing something, right? In the midst of all of this, and a lot of companies also cut people. WWE isn't the only one. But a lot of companies, in many cases, probably had to. And then you have really super big companies, even bigger than the WWE, who also probably are just awash in money and didn't have to, but they did anyway. WWE felt, well, we have to show the stockholders that we're taking action. And thus, you had all of those talent cuts. Now, right now, this company is living the high life off all of that TV money, which is why all the folks that are going to say, see, all you naysayers claiming the WWE is in trouble and they're making, here they are making more money than ever. You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, they are. They are making more money now than at any point in their history. The company is bigger now than at any point in its history, in terms not only of the profit and the money they're generating, but also in terms of the number of talents they have under contract, and all those people down at the PC. The company has never been this big and making this much money. And almost all of it, a large majority of it, is television money. It's TV contract money. And I guess the Saudi Arabia deal, if you want to throw that in there, but I don't believe that was reflected in the Q2 numbers. What you need to remember is that as they continue to hemorrhage viewers, which has been going on now for years and years, certainly since Raw moved to 3 hours in 2012, if you put a chart up, I don't have it in front of me, even if I did, I'm not on video right now, but if you were to look at a chart, you would see the trend. And it has more to do than just with cord cutting and technology changing. That's always part of it, but believe me, there's something a little more sinister at play here. As they continue to hemorrhage viewers, that is going to make them less attractive in the years to come when those TV contracts lapse. Those TV contracts have an end date. They're not infinite. They should be doing everything they can to retain. They don't just want to grow your fan base. They just have to try to keep the people they already have. You always want to grow your fan base, but you don't want to do it by alienating the existing fans, because then they leave, and so you bring more people in, but you're not growing your overall base. They should be doing everything in their power to retain viewers and bring in new ones, and they're just not doing that. And that's going to come at a cost if they don't get their house in order creatively. So when we talk about these problems, no one is denying the fact that this company is making money hand over fist because they have all these different revenue streams, and when they need to, they can cut costs. Now, of course, like I said, they're running from one central location. They don't have trucks on the road, and the travel for the talent. All these expenses are down. So they're going to make money, but you've got to get your house in order, or else it's going to come back and bite you on the ass. That's how this works. Now, WWE Network subscribers were up by about 200,000 for the quarter. As of June 30th, they had just shy of 1.7 million total subscribers. That's globally. In the U.S., that number is around 1.2 million. This would be the first quarter to include that new free tier of the WWE Network. It looks like the idea for a paid tiered version that we've been hearing about for about a year now, which was very much in the works, and they've been asked about it on these investor calls in the past. That paid tiered version is pretty much all but dead. Although PW Insider says they are still prepping independent wrestling content to debut on the network soon, including content from Progress, ICW, Evolve, Dragon Gate USA, promotion over in Germany that they're partnered with called WXW. So this content is probably going to migrate over to the network within the next 6 months. That is still the plan. But then again, ICW and Progress, they had that content prepped and ready to go. They were going to add them to the network a year or two ago. And as the story goes, it was a Vince McMahon call to put a pause on that. So at any given moment, if he changes his mind, then that content is just going to sit there. But that should be coming to the network soon. But, just to go back to the viewers and growing the audience, NXT and AEW, if you look at their numbers, they vacillate. They go back and forth every single week. Those two shows have largely, even though they go up and down a little bit, they've largely maintained their audience levels through this pandemic over the last 4 or 5 months. Raw and SmackDown have dropped to the tune of 15% since April. So the whole, when I hear people using the pandemic as the only excuse or the primary excuse, it doesn't really wash when it comes to explaining why the drop has been so steep for those shows and not for others. If anything, you would think it would be pretty uniform throughout when it comes to wrestling programming, and it's not. To which Vince McMahon had this to say about NXT and AEW. He said, "It's something that's new, and what have you. And it's up to us to make Raw and SmackDown feel more youthful. You always have to build characters constantly. As far as Paul Heyman is concerned, he did, I thought, a very, very good job. in terms of creative. He never bothered to explain why he fired the guy if he thinks he did a very good job in terms of creative. If it was an issue with talent, I mean, I don't think he fired Paul Heyman because AJ Styles had an issue with him. Otherwise, AJ Styles has far more pull than I thought. But again, they moved AJ to a different show, so to me that doesn't make any sense. Unless there was some kind of mutiny and a whole group of talent came to Vince McMahon and said, we can't work with this guy, we don't trust him, we don't like him. And we just haven't heard that story. That story hasn't come out yet. Failing that, here you have the chairman of the board coming out and saying that this guy who I appointed a year ago as the executive director to help try to turn this show around or improve this show, I fired him. But, that Paul Heyman guy, I thought he did a very, very good job in terms of creative. And by the way, I think very, very good is a stretch. I know Paul Heyman supposedly had a long-term plan for building stars, but very, very good. Let's not kid ourselves into thinking that Monday Night Raw during the Paul Heyman run was so much better than it had been. There were weeks. It's not like Raw is total dog shit every single week. They'll crap out a diamond here and there, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking the show was that much better under him either. But nonetheless, if he did such a great job, then why is he fired? Why is he back to being the spokesman, the agent for Paul Heyman? Why is he not in that position anymore? This was never addressed. You would think that would be an important question if I were a shareholder. I would be wondering, okay, well, why was this man removed from his position? Apparently, unless I missed it, I don't think anybody brought that up. Anyway, McMahon continued. He says it just takes months. The key here is to be in front of an audience, and that's the main thing. Certainly getting in front of an audience. They are like a third person in the ring, so to speak, and right away you get action and reaction. You are able to shoot the audience as we shoot the audience a lot more. Oh, yeah, they sure do. They shoot the audience a lot more than any other sport does because they are such an integral part of what we do. So I would like to think that it's months away. No argument there. The audience is an essential part of the show, absolutely. And there's a lot of people who have given up on watching because they hate empty arena wrestling. They think it's terrible. They think it's just boring and dull and lifeless and not the way that pro wrestling was meant to be produced. Wrestling is meant to be produced in front of a live audience. So a lot of people have dropped off, and some of those people might come back when Raw and SmackDown get back in front of crowds. You'll see some people come back. I think the bigger issue is if more and more people continue to tune out to the tune of, I don't know, let's say 500,000 people, 800,000 people, 1 million people. Do you really think that all of those people in 6 months or 12 months or 8 months are going to just magically reappear? That's what I would be worried about. Because I don't think all those people are coming back. But I can't argue with the point that these shows are not as good. They're just not. Even the weeks where we say, oh, SmackDown was a pretty good show this week. Hey, Raw had a good show. Even so, those shows will always be inferior to the shows that have live audiences because it is not natural to have shows the way that they are producing these shows. I mentioned NWA Power. I made the joke before that that's basically what WWE has become. They've become a studio wrestling show. Well, even NWA Power would sell out their GPB studios down there in Atlanta, and they would have 200 or 250 people in the audience. It wasn't in front of nobody. It wasn't in front of a bunch of wrestlers surrounding the ring. That is not how wrestling is supposed to be. So I agree with him on that. But that's not going to be enough. Getting fans back in the buildings is not going to magically make the product that much better. The shows have to improve. This guy is full of excuses. It's injuries. We lost talent. It's the pandemic. You notice every investor's call, it's something different. We didn't have this guy. We didn't have that guy. Remember the last one? Obviously, we don't have Brock Lesnar anymore. As if that's the primary reason. Because when Brock Lesnar was around, the show was just, 10 times better than it normally is. He brought everybody's game up for the one segment he would do. This guy's full of excuses. He's got every excuse in the book for why this is down and that's down. If you're going to promote new stars, you can't get bored with them after 3 weeks. I know he's saying all the right things. He acknowledges publicly we have to create new stars. He said that last time. I don't want to just hear it come out of his mouth. I want to see it in execution. They'll start pushing a guy and then he'll get bored. And he'll move on to the next shiny toy. Pick a group of guys to build around for the next 12 months. The talent is there. Aleister Black, they've done him, no favors recently, but Aleister Black, Drew McIntyre, who I think has done a good job. I know people are going to argue that point. I think he's doing a good job as champion. I don't think it is fair to lay all of the blame on him, or just because he's the champion to lay the majority of the blame for how bad Raw has performed, numbers-wise, to lay it all at his feet. Because he's the champion. The traditional metric was always, did he draw? Can he draw? If he's the champion, is he a draw? People call Kevin Nash the lowest drawing champion in history. And I don't know if the numbers exactly bear that out. I mean, he's near the bottom if he's not at the bottom. Although he does get some unfair criticism. I talked about him a few weeks ago, I think in the mailbag. And that clip is up on YouTube as well if you want to go back and hear my thoughts on that. But people call Kevin Nash, the lowest drawing champion in history. Well, Drew McIntyre isn't drawing anything right now because they're not selling any tickets. So how can you even find an accurate metric to determine how over or not over with the audience he is right now? The last pay-per-view, maybe the last couple of pay-per-views, even though he's the WWE champion, I don't believe he's even headlined the show. It's not like the main event has been built around him. It's been built around cinematic matches, swamp fights, and all kinds of stuff. I hate to kind of say it, but it kind of feels like he's in that CM Punk or Chris Jericho role as champion. He's the champion, but he's not necessarily positioned as the guy. He's not in all the main events. CM Punk had that whole year as WWE champion. Rarely did he actually headline. Usually it was John Cena in the main event. They had a pay-per-view where it was John Cena against John Laurinaitis, and that was the main event of the pay-per-view. CM Punk was on underneath, defending the championship against Daniel Bryan. But they didn't see him at that level. They didn't trust him enough to put him in the main event. There's been a little bit of that with Drew McIntyre. But how do you even find an accurate metric to know how over or not over he is with the audience? I mean, some weeks his television segments, some weeks do well. Other weeks, they don't. They promoted a rematch, for example, just this past Monday night. They promoted a rematch with him and Dolph Ziggler that aired in the third hour of the show. And that was the main event this past week. And that third hour of Raw from this past Monday night did the lowest number of viewers for an hour in the history of the show. In the 27-year history, 27 and a half year history of the show, that third hour on Monday night, which, by the way, NXT and AEW beat, did the lowest number of viewers in the history of the show. But it was against Dolph fucking Ziggler. The same Dolph Ziggler who he already beat a week earlier at Extreme Rules. You need more than that to determine whether or not he is a drawing champion. And right now, nobody is drawing. The brand is not drawing. But I hope he gets the chance to prove himself once crowds are back in the buildings, because I think Drew could do very well. This period has not done him any favors, and I hope he gets the chance before they get bored of him, or they just kind of write him off. Well, we tried. You got to invest more time in some of these people. Have a little more faith. Have a little more trust. Andrade and Angel Garza. Garza is a star in the making. If they take their time with him, I do like the fact that he's been getting TV time each week. Murphy, who is a lackey for Seth Rollins, but again, they're taking their time with him. They've associated him with somebody else who is one of the big names on the show. It's a good position. He's a lackey, but it's a good position for him to be in. But think of all the guys that they did not take their time with, or they started and they stopped. They pushed him for a few weeks and then they moved on to the next person. That shit has to stop. This bipolar booking has to stop. You want to create new stars? The whole system has to change. And like Eric Young said last week, the system is broken. Whatever you think of Eric Young, he made a valid point. As somebody who had to work within this system and was extraordinarily frustrated and dealt with Vince McMahon personally, one-on-one, The system is broken. And the system cannot change until repairs are made. And it's not just folks on the internet. It's not just people like me talking about all of this. There was a top research firm. They put out an analysis this week ahead of the earnings, basically calling out WWE creative. It's very rare that you hear a group like this calling out creative, the writing, the storylines. They're usually talking about other things. They specifically called out creative, and they found that unless they can turn their TV ratings around, if the current trends were to continue, they will not be able to get the same big rights fees that they're getting right now from Fox and NBC Universal. It's exactly what I just got done talking about. It says, COVID or no COVID, creative appears to be at the center of the issues. Vince McMahon has acknowledged the need to change multiple times. However, while there has been short-lived experiments, the content appears to continuously return to a similar formula under his absolute control. McMahon went so far as to hire creative heads for Raw and SmackDown a year ago, with Paul Heyman heading Raw and Eric Bischoff heading SmackDown. Neither are in their roles a year later. Bischoff was fired after 4 months on the job. Heyman was relieved last month. The role is now consolidated under Bruce Pritchard. WWE's largest problem is an inability to create new stars. More broadly, there really has been very little younger talent that has broken through at all on their way to replenishing even the middle-level stars in the men's division. This has made the company more susceptible to injuries and absences. Much of the talent with drawing power is aging. And the big draws for major events have been in bringing back even older wrestlers such as Goldberg and The Undertaker. That is a band-aid, not a long-term strategy. That's from an investment firm. And Variety posted an article this week with the headline, "As WWE ratings tumble, McMahon must stop blaming storylines." It says investors should be worried. No improvement has been made in ratings. If audiences continue to trend down, there's little chance that last year's huge renewals will be repeated when the contracts are up. Given how often McMahon referred to the need to improve storylines, it's a wonder that investors are yet to hold him accountable for the consistent line that things have to improve. So people seem to finally be waking up to this fact. People outside the wrestling bubble seem to be waking up to this fact. The drumbeat is getting louder. Although I almost stopped reading that Variety article after I read this line. Creatively, the current product or the current content on WWE's flagship shows could arguably be said to consistently have been the best in years, the best it has been in several years, with long-term character arcs returning for superstars like Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt, and storylines recalling prior events and relationships between wrestlers. I almost stopped reading right then and there. But Vince McMahon has now publicly acknowledged the need to create new stars. Will he follow through? That is the question. Will he follow through, or is it too late to get a lot of those people back who have turned off the TV?